pray you open your whole self to sky, to earth, to sun, to moon, to one whole voice that is you, and know there's more that you can't see, can't hear, can't know except in moments, steadily growing, and in languages that aren't always sound, but other circles of motion. That excerpt is from Eagle Poem by Joy Harjo, and that's one of the readings that this sermon for the fifth Sunday of Lent springs from. The other is from the prophet Jeremiah, chapter 31, verses 31 through 34. Now you open yourself, she says, to one whole voice that is you, and know there's more. More of you than you know. More of you that you cannot see, cannot hear. More of you you cannot know except in moments steadily growing and in languages that are not always uttered in the sound of words, but rather in circles of motion. And there, at the eye of the calm circle of motion, like an eagle gliding on gentle currents of air high above sight, is what Jeremiah shared, the covenant written on our hearts, placed there by the God of all that is. When we open our whole selves to sky, to earth, to sun, to moon, to one whole voice that is us, we begin to sense there's more there than we know, more inside than we have imagined, more that we cannot name and cannot hold except in tiny moments. Nanoseconds of prayer or something that causes us to recognize that the God of all that is even in us, and we are in it. Joy Harjo's soaring eagle and Jeremiah's new covenant point to the same wholeness we sometimes get an inkling of, sometimes get a hold of in tiny moments. The Jeremiah reading we had today is what sometimes is called Jeremiah's Book of Comfort. Not always known for his cheery or comfortable words, Jeremiah has a 2-chapter shout out to the exiles who were in despair over their Babylonian captivity. They had seen themselves as the apple of God's eye. Their land, flowing with milk and honey as promised by Moses when they wandered across the Sinai Peninsula in the Exodus, was suddenly no longer their land. The capital city with its holy temple built by Solomon now lay in ruins. The covenant, the promise by God that they would be God's people if they kept God's commandments. That covenant was clearly broken. The land had been the sign of the covenant. And as Jeremiah and other prophets had warned, they lost it all because of their iniquity. The commandments required justice, and they required compassionate community, and they required thoughtful administration of blessings and struggles and opportunities. None of that was done. Instead, the rich got richer, the powerful got more powerful, the poor got more marginalized, and the covenant broke under the weight of the sin of opulence. But now, placed upon the lips of God's prophet, there comes the promise of a new covenant, one that cannot be broken, because it's not transactional. It's not, if you keep my covenant, but here is my covenant, and I place it on your heart. It's no longer an external document, but rather the whole voice that is you. Now, Jeremiah's comfortable words here is not the beginning of individualism, which is an opulent sin of modernity. It is the covenant written on the hearts of the community. It exists within the community, and the community is given the gift without conditionality. It's not a transaction. It is a gift. That's the newness of the new covenant. The heart of Torah is still in it, but Torah is now written in their hearts. It is understood. It is known. The God of all that is known. The covenant, including all of its commandments for justice and for peace and for walking humbly with God with kindness in our hearts, in the wholeness of the circling motion we sometimes get to be held by when we open ourselves to it, our whole selves to earth and sky and sun and moon, all of that within surrounds the covenant. Now, fifth Sunday of Lent, we've crossed the tipping point of Lent and headed for the Rubicon of Palm Sunday when we enter into Holy Week. Though I do not think the lectionary meant to do it, Jeremiah is a beautiful lens through which to view Lent, one that is not grounded in sin sickness, shame, guilt, grotesque self-abasement, and mutilation. Rather, I will forgive their iniquity and remember their sin no more. Spoken on the lips of Isaiah on behalf of the God who speaks through the prophet. I will forgive their iniquity and remember their sin no more. So let us enter the next 2 weeks remembering that God no longer remembers our sins. Let us enter the next 2 weeks and walk through them as if the God of all that is in our hearts and we are in God. If we do that and not groveling for forgiveness or approval in spite of all that we've done wrong, we will see the story of the events of Jesus' last day as a tragedy holding wisdom for us. We were not there in spite of the hymn. We were not in Gethsemane. We were not on Calvary. We were not there. That was not our sin, and Jesus did not know about us, and Jesus didn't know about our sins. Jesus died for things that had to do with his time and his place. And what happened to him does not condemn or mark us in any kind of way. That makes no sense. Long before Jesus, according to Jeremiah, God forgave our iniquity and remembers our sin no more. Now, some will hear that and think it frees us to be complacent. There's no reason not to sin, they will complain. To which I would respond, well, if our only reason not to do awful things is because we are scared of hell, I'm guessing we're doing some awful things anyway and pretending Jesus dying on the cross lets us off the hook. The awesome, amazing, and stunning thing about being immersed in a spiritual community, gathered around sacred wisdom, held in stories and lyrics of Moses and Jeremiah and Jesus and others, is that we know in our hearts what is good. We know in our hearts what is equitable. We know in our hearts what is just. We know in our hearts what is a source of peace and what is an instrument of violence. We know. No one has to tell us. We know. We may not always do what we know, but we know. You and I, in our hearts, we know what the God of all that is has placed there. We know it, and even though we struggle with it, and sometimes we pile junk all over on top of it to pretend we don't know it, we know it. It didn't just sprout there by accident. It was placed there as a gift, without condition, when we became part of the community. It got nurtured and it grew as we allowed ourselves to be influenced by the community. It's there now, And we feel it in the circle of motion that gets stirred when we gather at this table for this purpose. God forgives our iniquity and remembers our sin no more, not so that we can be complacent, but so that we can remember who we are and whose we are. That the God of all that is in our hearts. So instead of reading the story of Jesus' passion through the theological lens that he died for our sins, let's open the book with new eyes and read it differently. We don't need our sins to be forgiven. They already are. That was a gift given by God long, long, long ago. Instead, let us open the book and read the stories with new eyes and seek a new wisdom, whispering to us in the life and the teachings and the death of Jesus of Nazareth. The God of all that is in our heart. And we know it. Hey, thank you for being here. Peace be with you.